Welcome to Mental Health and Business. I have a pleasure today to introduce you to Tim Butaro, who's the podcast host of the Agile Drop, who's agreed very graciously to be on air with me. Hopefully, we'll have some interesting conversations for you about digital marketing and psychology. So, Tim, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Nick. Happy to be here. Happy to discuss topics related to psychology and to the digital world with you. You know, it's one of my favorite topics to discuss on my podcast, stuff related to psychology, stuff related to mental health. So I was definitely excited when you asked me if I'd be willing to have a conversation with you on your podcast before we even do, spoiler alert, before we even do the conversation with you for our podcast. So we have everything to look forward to. Happy to be here.
Well, that's great. And I just to let people know a little bit about you, we were talking just before we started that you have a master's in English literature. I always find I have a crazy background. I've done too many things and have too many degrees. But I'm always very interested in people whose career trajectory isn't a straight line. So I thought maybe we could start off by if you wouldn't mind saying something about the intersection of literature and technology, which I think is, because when
that's
I think
an interesting one. I mean, I guess one thing that definitely holds true for both is that both of them rely heavily on language, on words. So, even if we're talking technology, not in the sense of something that gives you content and allows you to produce content and to distribute content to others, even if we even if we discount and even if we don't talk about the actual content production and content distribution side of tech, of the digital, there's still, just software itself is written in certain languages, in programming languages. It's a code, basically, and it's a code that enables something else to understand and to make something based off of that language input. So in that sense, a language major or language studies do have some kind of intersection, especially for me, since I'm, as far as tech goes, I'm on the content production side. I'm the content marketing specialist here at Agile Drop. And besides the podcast, I also do written content. I also write a lot of articles. So it was not, and especially because we do a lot of our marketing in the global sense to the broader community, not just locally in Slovenia. So most of the work that I do is actually in English, and this is where having an English major is a major boon, if I can say so myself.
That's great. No, that's a wonderful answer. Sure, of course. Computers and computing. The computing world is very, very dependent on computer language. I guess one of the similarities and one of the differences is maybe that it's easier to, how do I say this? I think one of the things I have, as I said, a circuitous career, and I studied literature and got a master's in ancient Greek and did all kinds of crazy things. And when people ask me how does that impact what you do now, I think language is saturated with psychology, and whatever we mean by great literature, I think one of the things we mean for all time and now is that characters and psychological portraits are real in great literature, and they're startlingly real, right? So they're, the difference between great literature and a cartoon is that cartoons are about, good and bad and right and wrong and Superman and the devil and, all that. And better literature and great literature actually has many more contradictions and nuances, which is one of the things that makes it so great. So I don't know where am I going with this. I guess one of the things I'm interested in asking you is, psychologically, from language standpoint, what is your perception of working digitally with people, And how has that changed, if it has, I assume it has, your sort of psychological appreciation of things, right? I mean, we've all heard people say that texting is really dangerous because, you know, when you text, you only have like little messages and you can't really understand where someone's coming from. So as someone who works in tech and has a liberal arts background, or at least a substantial piece of your background is liberal arts, how would you how do you talk about the psychology of your business, given the fact that a lot of it's online?
Ooh, that's a tough one, and I think it requires a multifaceted answer. Because on the one hand, you know, it is as you said, texting is kind of reductive, and these digital forms of communication barely allow you to have an actual genuine connection with someone. And I'm definitely someone that appreciates genuine connections rather than very shallow, superficial ones. But on the other hand, it would be, you know, it would not be possible for us to have any kind of connection whatsoever if it weren't for the digital. Not even that. It wouldn't even come to that because we wouldn't even know about each other if it weren't for the digital.
Right.
I've always viewed digital communication and digital connection, especially, as this kind of double-edged sword, right? I'm a millennial. I grew up, you know, I grew up kind of with the internet. I still remember what it was like when you wanted to go on the internet, and that meant that nobody could go on the phone for the entire time, or vice versa, that you couldn't go on the phone
Oops.
because somebody was on the internet. Uh, so in my case, digital communication, when I was growing up, it wasn't a replacement of actual in-person communication. It was like even if you were outside with friends on your phones or playing the Game Boy or something like that, it was always a community thing. You know, it was never isolated. It was never like, oh, each one of us just staring into our own phone. It was always like a group thing. We were watching each other play, you know, Snake, or on the original Nokia phones or stuff like that. And then came the first messenger apps, and then MySpace and Facebook and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And f- for me, it was definitely, you know, it was a boon at first because I never really allowed it to kind of have a negative impact on my in person physical genuine connections and friendships and relationships with friends.
Oh.
But then you come to something like COVID, where you know, you kind of are isolated just out of necessity and out of some kind of duty. uh, and you know, in my personal case, I was also very heavily depressed, and also already isolated right before COVID hit, and for quite a long time actually. So that meant that it was kind of a natural transition to just stay isolated and to not seek, you
Hmm.
know, company, not seek opportunities to meet with people that much. And then in that case, you know, for the first few months, having the ability to connect with people digitally and having more and more, you know, video calls with people, that was really nice. It was really awesome. And I felt much less isolated. But then as that progressed, you get kind of complacent in this digital way of communicating. And it starts not being enough. I think, you know, it's only good if it's a balance to actual genuine in-person communication, if it's an add-on, not if it's a replacement.
I think that's great. I think that's really helpful to hear and great. You know, there was a he's probably dead right now. I'm sorry to say, but there was a very very brilliant psychoanalyst who wrote a number of things about uh, digital and analog time, right? So he made the point in a number of his essays about how how certain people, he was talking more about psychoanalysis than he was technology, but I think this is relevant to our conversation. He had a whole business about how certain people experience time digitally,
Hmm.
um, whether or not they use technology, that they don't have a sense of continuity. They don't have a sense that, you know, if you look at an analog clock and you watch the sweep second hand and you watch the minute hand and the hour hand, it's continuous. One thing leads into the other. One thing leads into the other. But digitally, it's all, you know, one shot. It's like 1257. and it's 12:58.
Wow.
And psychologically, there are people, I won't go into this, but there are people, regardless of the actual technology, who experience time and therefore life in a digital way. They're disconnected. And I think for those folks, and for the rest of us, to your point, if digital technology is taking over the majority of how we communicate, our sense of time is going to be very fractured. I mean, I guess that's kind of obvious, right? But I think that's an important thing for people to keep in mind, that this should not replace human contact. Years ago, I taught at NYU for many years, and one year the dean of students insisted that the entering freshman class meet one another in person and not online, and they couldn't register for courses until they met in person. And the student body was just so amazed by this. This was the best thing that ever happened. Like, they actually had to walk into a room and look each other in the eye and say, "Hi, I'm so and so," and they wouldn't get anything otherwise. I thought it was great, but it was also kind of, what is human contact becoming like some kind of weird great thing now? Anyway. So there we have it. So your team meetings and most of the things you do, or all of them, are online.
Yes, I mean, I do still, even though I have a contract for working from home, but sometimes I'll still go to the office, either if there's some kind of in-person, either small team building or some kind of common lunch at the company, or just, I know that, like, a coworker I really like and I really want to see is in the office that day, and we agreed to have lunch together, and I'll just go into the office. So I might go, I don't know, a couple times a month. But yeah, most of the stuff is done over some kind of video tool, and the podcasts are obviously all recorded through Zoom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And is there an attempt on a company-wide basis to try to be more related? Like, are there online happy hours, or how do you deal with that?
Related in what sense exactly?
Like, more human, more sort of like getting to know you, or more. It used to be the water cooler, right? That was the metaphor, like talking around the water cooler. And there's no water cooler here.
Well, at the beginning of COVID, we had these daily online coffees, which was really nice. And it was really cool because, sometimes you would have like somebody who just joined the team that day, and they would say hi in Slack. And we would be like, "Oh, we're just having this online coffee daily thing in like 15 minutes. Why don't you go ahead and join?" And then she would be like, "Oh, cool." And she would be on the coffee call with us for like 30 minutes, 45 minutes. And it was her first day. And, I think that during that time, it was really great way to have people really feel welcome at the company, despite the times being so strange, and despite not being able to meet everybody. Right, what you were just talking about that college that really wanted everybody to apply in person, to have this in-person experience, have a look in each other's eyes. And I guess this is that one part of digital communication where it's actually possible to do that, as opposed to just texting, or just I guess calling someone through a phone is also enabled by technology.
Yeah, and I think the more I think and talk about this, when I was many years ago, when I was at graduate school, the idea of having phone sessions with people was just met with disbelief. Like, we'll never do that. We will never do that. We're not going to do a phone session, much less a screen session, much less an entire treatment where you never meet the person, right? But I don't think I have no empirical studies to base this on, but I don't think that it's the technology that prevents people from relating. What I say relating, I mean, it takes a lot to relate, right? Relating, I think basically means something like, you have the capacity to see someone else as an other. You have the capacity to be curious. You have interest in knowing who the other person is, and that can certainly happen, and does happen, obviously, online. The people that have trouble with that are not having trouble because of the technology, I don't think. They have trouble with that because they have trouble with that anyway. You know, they have trouble relating. They have trouble feeling comfortable enough and secure enough to share their thoughts and feelings and be curious. And that's true with or without the technology. So I think that's one of the reasons why technology has been, it's not technology that's been successful. I think that's why we've been successful in being able to use technology precisely the way we do, is that those of us who want to relate and communicate on somewhat deep levels can do that. And people do that. I'm not sure that was a big point there, but
No, I think that one part it's not even as simple because the technology that's enabling this has not been static. And I would say that in the past, in the early days of digital communication, in the early days of instant messaging, of social media apps and websites, before the widespread proliferation of smartphones and the really fast internet on the phone, because you used to have internet on the phone, but it was very slow. It was a pain in the neck to use. But in those days, technology was much less the issue. But I'd say I just watched a great video essay on this like yesterday, or it was yesterday evening, about how everything is becoming blender and blender on the internet, how technology is just becoming so uniform and everything is based on the same old tried and true concepts in quotation marks, but they are tried and true for a reason, but they didn't get tried and true for the same reasons, right? It's complicated, and it's basically in the beginning you had something like MySpace, which enabled you to really customize your profile, which allowed you to have all of these really unique features that were sometimes stolen from something else, sometimes totally unique, sometimes just a combination of the best features for this. And it allowed people to basically have their own mini websites, their own mini brands. But then Facebook was basically the complete opposite. It was very uniform, everything was the same, and that uniformity has just progressed over time. And also as the internet becomes much more of a kind of cash cow, as data becomes more and more valuable, and as the tech giants are realizing how data is becoming more and more valuable, then the initial purposes of these platforms, I believe, kind of start to fade away and get replaced with what the platform wants for investors, for everybody, who basically for stakeholders who are poised to profit from that, rather than for the people that are actually using the platform. And that, I think, exacerbates the problem of people who already have trouble relating, as you pointed out just now. Those people will then have an even harder time relating in an environment that's basically designed to exploit them rather than to enable them.
yeah, that's a big topic, boy. I had a podcast. Was I on it or did I do it? I think I did it. A podcast with a very smart fellow who has done a lot of research in scammers. And I mean, you probably know much more about this than I do, but I was floored by the South. Apparently, Southeast Asia is the hubbub of professional scammers, up to and including sex trafficking and all the rest of it. I mean, just horrible things. But we were talking about how gullible people are on the internet. And I told him the story when I was in training. I had two senior analysts, I mean, in their 80s, contact me and ask me if I was in Africa and if I needed money.
Oh my God.
And I said, "What are you talking about? I just saw you yesterday." And these were people. I mean, these were not dumb people, and they were not psychologically naive people. These were seasoned psychoanalysts, very successful, major forces in the field, and they got duped by this guy. Luckily they didn't send him any money. But I thought to myself, how is that possible? I just saw you like maybe not yesterday, but a week ago. Do you actually think I'm in Africa needing money? Like, what happened to you?
Well, but they did call and they did ask you, so kudos to them for that.
I guess, but why didn't they just put that message in the trash bin? It's crazy. I mean, that leads us in. Well, let me ask you, what do you think is the what? What's the profile of someone who's going to be scammed?
It's somebody who's very trusting, I guess, and somebody who's not experienced with the digital and especially the internet uh, personally. The internet can do, yeah, so they may just have heard about what the internet can do, maybe, from friends, from relatives, from children, sometimes from grandchildren. Uh, it also depends on the scam. Obviously, I'd say, I mean, from what I've seen, the most likely people to get scammed for money are older people who are not used to this kind of digital communication, and they don't know that a link that was sent to them says, I don't know, Twitter instead of Twitter, or something stupid like that. Whereas you also get, those social media viruses, which then spam random content to all of your friends and tag all of your friends and then proliferate like that. And in
Right.
that case, it's going to be people who use social media the most. For me, it was usually younger people. But for the really serious scams, I think it's people who aren't digitally savvy, and that tends to be people who've had less experience with technology. So people who've used it for a smaller amount of time. So older people very often. Uh, but it also really depends. The scams are evolving so rapidly. Now you have AI powered voice clone scams, deep fakes. I once got a spam email which was something like, oh, your online privacy is at risk. Make sure you're secured by clicking on this link. And I was like, oh man, that was like next level. You almost got me there. Obviously, you didn't, but those kind of playing on the exact thing that you're like conscious of and perhaps anxious of, and using that to exploit you in that particular area. Oh, I'm glad that I'm getting a tougher skin for all of that through all of these scams that I avoid and deflect.
Yeah, right, right. I think in order to be scammed, you have to have some kind of deficit in technological awareness,
Hmm.
and I think you have to be somehow psychologically naive. I mean, even these two, grandfathers of the field. I mean, I don't know what was going on with them, but that was like, whoa.
I really dislike the word naive. In my view, it's mostly a word that people with bad intentions use to justify their poor intentions, and blame them on somebody else. It's not me that's trying to trick you. It's your fault because you're naive. I don't think there's anything wrong with being trusting, and it's how we call it. It's it, if people are tricking you because you're naive, then that's on them, not on you for being naive. I mean that like I really dislike that word, but I know what you mean. It has practical use, I guess.
Right. A good point. I mean, I certainly never thought of that when I use the word naive. I don't. Yeah, good point. I'll be careful not to use it. I mean, I just mean inexperienced.
Hmm.
It's not a condemnation, but it's just and I think, yeah, as I keep talking about these two old fellows, I mean, they were naive, and that's a contradiction in who they were. Um, but yeah, it's psychological, right? So if you as a person are not particularly psychologically sophisticated, that's a problem anyway, and it's going to be a big problem on the internet because
Hmm.
there are, and there always will be, right? There are assholes out there, and there are people who are just waking up in the morning wanting to do you ill, and that's bad, but that's always been the case.
Man, it's so hard to imagine. Like if you're not the asshole who does that, and it's like, why is that so, like, why is it not just random to some people and something that just happens as like a course of, I don't know, as a size, as a consequence of, as a side effect of them doing something for themselves, but to actually dedicate energy and effort and time into making the experience worse for other people. Man, I just can't wrap my head around that.
I know. I mean, I think diagnostically, they're all in or hovering around the very seriously narcissistic camp, right? They think of themselves primarily, and if not exclusively, they justify what they do. Um, that's narcissism is alive and well throughout the world. Anyway, how do we get off scammers? Get on scammers. So what do you read these days? You with this interesting background of literature and currently tech, like what is it? What do you read in addition to tech stuff? I'm sure. I'm wondering what you read these days. What do you read for enjoyment?
Oh man, I have to be honest here and admit that even though I've really got back my love for reading in the past few years, I've been having a very hard time reading anything personally
Oh,
for more than half a year actually. Just because I've been kind of very burnt out. I had some very difficult stuff that I needed to get through this year, and it started like kind of in October of last year.
oh,
I've been struggling to read The Master and Margarita. I love it. It's a wonderful book by Mikhail Bulgakov. It's
mm,
really great, but it's not that easy to read, especially if you're reading it very sporadically. And you
mm-hmm,
know they're like small bits that it's just one small paragraph amidst several really important pages of some really important story, and then that one small paragraph ends up being super important, like a few hundred pages on.
oh,
And then it's just, because I kind of had it on pause for a long time, I had to reread parts. But I have tons of books, that I've bought, maybe for my birthday or for New Year's, for Christmas.
mm.
I really like the Japanese author Haruki Murakami. I really love
Oh
his
yeah,
books.
sure. Yeah.
Uh, Awesome author. It's basically anything I pick up from him, I enjoy. I really enjoy reading. I really enjoy fantasy stuff, sci-fi. Sometimes not as much, but yeah, just a lot of Murakami. Mm, Master and Margarita, as I said, still trying to get through that. I need to pick it up. I was just thinking about having to revisit it. I think just before we jumped on this call, actually.
Yeah, I think, I mean, listen, I will say this, I will say something similar. I mean, I love to read, and I find it really difficult. I find it difficult to sit still, and I find it difficult to focus on something that's not practical, business related, kid related. I have a 20-year-old daughter. I can focus on her. But yeah, and I don't blame psychology, blame technology for that. But I do think that we're just so used to doing so many things at the same time. Like the multitasking has just been, when I think of most of my life, I spent hours a week reading. That's all I did. Various languages, and I loved it. Like that's what I like to do. And now I have to force myself to say, I'm reading 3 books right now. And I have to force myself to do it
Hmm.
because I'm just getting up and doing this and looking at that. And I finally turned off all the flags and banners and whistles on my various devices, so that's done. But it's hard. It's hard. And I think, yeah, I think there's something about it's not just reading, but I think there's something about being still and focused on something significant that we're losing track of.
It's the attention span. It is the shortened attention span. It's being so used to ingesting content that's either very short form on the one hand, like stuff like TikToks, and before that, yeah, I remember Vines, which were like 7 second sketches, and that coincides with exactly the memory span that we've now been reduced to. And then on the other hand, you might have long form content, but it's all narrated for you, right? It's
Yeah,
it's long podcasts, it's shows, it's films, it's stuff like that. And it doesn't really, the mind never gets to work, and it just becomes very complacent, and imagination kind of stagnates also because of that. Because if you read a book, then you just have to create all of the images, you have to create the movie in your mind. But if you're watching a movie or a movie adaptation, it's very reduced to just what you're shown on the screen, and it kind of hinders the imagination even more, right? Not only do you not need to imagine what's on the screen, but you don't even need to imagine all the implications of what's on the screen, because it's already visually appealing enough.
yeah, no, completely well said. Yeah, and it's passive, right? I mean, to
Hmm.
make an honest point, it's just so passive. And I love being entertained. I love watching movies, but it's a different kind of engagement, obviously. I had something you said something that made me want to ask you a question. What the hell was it? Reading. Oh, Moby Dick. I actually read Moby Dick. I forced myself to read Moby Dick, and it was great. And it took me a month, I think. Have I lost you? No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's. I was just thinking that it's so funny that we're talking about digital communication, and then we have all of these connection issues that are really making it more difficult to have a
Yeah.
genuine, awesome connection. Even though, but we're still doing a good job, I think.
And just so our audience knows, we didn't plan it this way.
Yeah, yeah. This is totally jammed. This is totally spontaneous.
That's great. That's great. Of course, it's happening. It's happening as we're talking. Yeah, that's really funny. That's really funny. So yeah. So have I asked you all the questions that I have? No, of course not. Um, where do you see you going? I mean, you obviously have this background, this powerful background in literature, and you also obviously are very good at the technology side. Where do you want to go from here? Like, what's your next step?
Well, I really want to get back into creating more, back into music, back into maybe even performing, maybe, doing some stuff like more related to psychology, stuff like that. Uh, Maybe still doing podcasts, I think I'm quite good at that. And I'm, you know, I wanted to study psychology actually because I'm a very good listener, and I often, by listening in the right way and by uh, making just the right nudges, I'm able to make people, share stuff that maybe they haven't even thought of, or it's just a totally new perspective for them. So I think it would be a shame if I just stopped doing the podcasting thing ever.
Mm,
But we'll see if it's in tech, if it's maybe, if it's related to something else. But, one thing that would be awesome is to have like a podcast interviewing people who are into art, who are into music, to kind of combine the
mm,
two things. That's something that I really, really enjoy personally, and something that I'm really good at. But we'll see when slash if that comes along. And yeah, maybe in time you'll get to listen to me on more podcasts where I'm the host as well as the guest, maybe. Or you'll
that's
get to listen to me in other contexts other than just podcasting, I guess.
what is that? Sounds wonderful. What is it that you play an instrument?
I play mostly guitar. I like singing. I play bass guitar, and then I play a lot of random stuff, such as the piano and most of the stuff that I can get my hands on. I'm not good at stuff like I've never played any brass instrument. I've tried playing some drums, which I really liked. Actually, I'm having my first musical performance in over 13 years in just a few weeks. I'm not sure when this is coming out, but it'll be in late July at a small festival here. It'll just be acoustic. But I figured, why not apply? The worst thing that can happen is that I don't get accepted. And would you look at that? I did actually get accepted. So I'm really excited about that right now.
I love that. Is it going to be filmed? Send it to me if it is.
I'm not sure if the whole thing is going to be filmed, but definitely, I mean, some of my friends are going to be there, and I'm sure that they'll film at least, some parts of it. So yeah, like if I don't send it to you by, let's say, next month, make sure to remind me, and I'll send you whatever I have at that time.
Okay, that's great. It's great that we're on this because what what's just happened really is an awareness of integration and balance, right? That it's not technology versus literature or music versus politics or something. It's and and the notion of a balanced life or an integrated life is a very personal issue, right? Very, very personal. But we do know that it's better than not, in a general way. To have
Mhm.
more avenues of expression and more areas of engagement is by and large a better thing than having fewer. I mean, at a certain point, it gets manic and crazy, and that's not good. But it sounds like you're into all kinds of interesting things.
Yeah, there's
Listen,
got to be balance in the force, right? and just I'd also say balance is what makes things actually good. What makes you appreciate things, because if something, you only appreciate something because it's balanced by the opposite of that something. You appreciate company because you sometimes don't have company, and you appreciate being alone because you sometimes have too much company, and you appreciate digital communication because you sometimes can't be with a person physically, but you appreciate in-person communication because you get fed up with always just talking to somebody through texts, and it's all just an interplay of different stuff, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that. I love that. All right, Tim. Well, listen, we're going to sign off here. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure my listeners will be getting a lot out of this. I'm gonna have my folks at Riverside help me edit this up, so it won't be so choppy. But thank you, thank you, thank you. Hope to see you again.
And I guess just thank you for having me. I really enjoyed speaking with you today. It was a really, really awesome discussion. I wasn't sure what we were getting into, but it was exactly the thing that we were supposed to get into, I feel. Thanks, Nick.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Me too. All right. Bye.
Cheers.